The Valdrix research station floated in the cold darkness of space like a forgotten toy. It was small, barely large enough to hold 200 scientists and their families. The station orbited a dying star in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, far from any major trade routes or military bases. Nobody had expected trouble here. Nobody had prepared for war. Captain Zillera pressed her three-fingered hand against the observation window and watched the enemy ships arrive. They came out of hyperspace like a swarm of angry insects. First 10, then 50, then more than she could count. Their hulls were black and covered with strange symbols that seemed to move and shift in the starlight. That Korath had found them. She was a Vellani, a species known for their intelligence and peaceful nature. Her people had blue skin that sparkled slightly when light touched it. They had built this station to study the unusual radiation patterns coming from the dying star. They had never wanted to fight anyone, but the Korath did not care about peace or science. They cared only about conquest. The communications officer, a young male named Vevin, turned from his station with terror in his large eyes. His voice shook as he spoke. "The enemy ships have surrounded us completely," he said. "There is no escape route. They are jamming most of our long-range communications." Zillera closed her eyes and tried to think. The station had no weapons worth mentioning. A few small defense turrets that were meant to destroy space debris, nothing more. Against a fleet of warships, they would be useless. The shields could hold for perhaps a few hours, maybe a full day if they were lucky. After that, everyone on the station would die or become slaves. "How many Korath ships?" she asked, keeping her voice calm even though her hearts were racing. Devon looked at his screen again. 217 warships, he answered, plus support vessels. "It is a full invasion fleet." The number hit her like a physical blow. 217 warships to capture a small research station. It made no sense. Unless the Korath knew something about this station that she did not. Unless there was something here worth such a massive force. She turned to her chief scientist, an elderly Vellani named Drosa, who had spent 50 years studying the stars. "Drosa," she said, "is there anything on this station that the Korath would want so badly? Anything worth sending such a fleet?" Drosa's face went pale. Her blue skin turned almost white. She looked at the floor, unable to meet her captain's eyes. "I did not think anyone knew," she whispered. "We found something 6 months ago. Something ancient. Something powerful." The other officers in the command center turned to stare at the old scientist. Zillera felt cold fear spreading through her body. "What did you find, Drosa?" She demanded. "A weapon," Drosa admitted, "hidden in the radiation field near the star. It is very old, perhaps millions of years. We do not fully understand how it works, but our initial tests showed it could destroy entire planets. We kept it secret because we did not want to cause panic. We were going to report it to the Galactic Council next month." Zillera wanted to scream. A planet-killing weapon, hidden on her station, and she had known nothing about it. No wonder the Korath had come in such force. If they got their hands on such a weapon, they could conquer the entire galaxy. No one would be able to stop them. The main view screen flickered, and a face appeared. It was a Korath commander. His reptilian features twisted into an expression of cruel pleasure. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel grinding together. "Attention, research station," he said. "I am Grand Admiral Vorath of the Korath Empire. You have something that belongs to us now. You will lower your shields and allow my soldiers to board. If you cooperate, some of you may be allowed to live as slaves. If you resist, we will destroy your station and take what we want from the wreckage. You have 1 hour to decide." The screen went dark. Zillera looked around at her officers and saw the same hopeless expression on every face. They all knew they were going to die. The Korath never kept their promises. Even if they surrendered, they would all be killed or worse. But Zillera was not ready to give up. She walked to the communications console and pushed Devon gently aside. "You said most of our long-range communications are jammed," she said. "Most, but not all." Vevin nodded slowly. "There is one frequency they have not blocked," he explained. "It is an old emergency channel, very weak. We could send a message, but it would take a long time to reach anyone, and I do not know if anyone still monitors that frequency." Zillera recognized the frequency code on the screen. Her blood ran cold when she realized what it was. That was the frequency reserved for contacting the humans, the Deathworlders, the species that other races spoke about in whispers, the beings who came from a planet so dangerous that it was a miracle they had survived at all. She had never met a human. Few Vellani had. The humans kept mostly to themselves, far away in their home sector. They were friendly enough to trade with, but they had a reputation. When the humans went to war, they did not stop until their enemies were completely destroyed. They were relentless, merciless, and absolutely terrifying, but they also had a code. If any peaceful species sent a distress signal on this frequency, the humans would come. They would always come. It was their way. Zillera's hands trembled as she prepared the message. She knew that calling the humans was like releasing a dangerous animal. She did not know what would happen when they arrived, but she knew what would happen if the Korath got the ancient weapon. The entire galaxy would burn. She pressed the transmit button and spoke clearly into the microphone. This is Captain Zillera of the Valdrix Research Station. We are under attack by Korath forces. We have 200 civilians, including children. We cannot defend ourselves. Please, if anyone hears this message, we need help. We need the Deathworlders." The message went out into the endless darkness of space, traveling at the speed of light toward the distant stars. Zillera did not know if anyone would hear it. She did not know if help would come in time. All she could do was wait and hope. Behind her, Drosa was crying quietly. The other officers were hugging each other, saying goodbye to loved ones through personal communicators. Outside the window, the Korath ships drifted closer like sharks circling wounded prey. The hour began to count down. Somewhere far away, in a sector of space that other races avoided, the message was about to reach ears that had been listening for exactly this kind of call. The humans were about to learn that someone needed their help. The message traveled through the void at impossible speed, bouncing off relay satellites and emergency beacons that had been placed centuries ago. It crossed empty regions where no life existed, passed through nebulas filled with colorful gas, and finally reached a small listening post on the edge of human-controlled space. Private First Class Marcus Chen was half asleep at his console when the alert sounded. He nearly fell out of his chair, spilling cold coffee across his uniform. The emergency frequency had been silent for 3 years. Most people thought it was outdated, a relic from older times when the galaxy was more dangerous. But the humans had never stopped listening. Marcus played the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. A research station, 200 civilians, Korath attack fleet. His hands were shaking as he forwarded the recording to his commanding officer. Within 5 minutes, the message had reached Admiral Sarah Okonkwo aboard the UN's Vengeance, the flagship of the 3rd Human Fleet. She was a tall woman with dark skin and gray hair, cut short in military fashion. She had fought in 4 wars and won all of them. When she heard the distress call, her eyes grew hard as steel. She pressed a button on her command chair and spoke to her entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Okonkwo. I am declaring a code Omega rescue operation. Prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. We leave in 30 minutes. Around her, the bridge crew exploded into action. Officers shouted commands, engineers rushed to prepare the engines, and weapons specialists began loading ammunition. The 3rd Fleet consisted of 42 warships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts that each carried enough firepower to level a small moon. On other ships throughout the fleet, soldiers and sailors prepared for battle. They checked their weapons, said prayers to whatever gods they believed in, and wrote quick messages to their families. They knew what a code Omega meant. Someone needed help, and they were going to give it. No matter the cost. Captain James Martinez stood on the bridge of the destroyer Yun's Fury and watched his crew work with pride. He was a young officer, only 30 years old, but he had proven himself in combat many times. His ship was fast, dangerous, and always ready for a fight. His first officer, a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Park, approached him with concern on her face. "Sir," she said quietly, "intelligence reports say there are over 200 Korath ships at those coordinates. We only have 42. The math does not favor us." Martinez smiled, showing teeth that seemed too sharp for a peaceful expression. "Lieutenant," he said, "we are not counting ships. We are counting humans, and I promise you they will wish they had brought more." Meanwhile, on another world entirely, word of the distress call reached a very different kind of military force. The Terran Marine Corps Special Operations Division was the most elite fighting unit in human history. They trained on worlds with double the gravity of Earth, survived in environments that would kill other species in minutes, and fought with a ferocity that had become legendary across the galaxy. Colonel Viktor Petrov read the mission briefing while eating breakfast. He did not seem concerned by the overwhelming enemy numbers. He had faced worse odds before and survived. His body was covered with scars from countless battles, and his left arm had been replaced with a cybernetic limb that was stronger than steel. He walked into the barracks where his soldiers were waiting. Their eyes followed him with absolute loyalty. These men and women would follow him into hell itself if he asked them to. Today, he was asking them to do something almost as dangerous. "We have a rescue mission," he announced. "Civilian station. Lots of families, kids. The bad guys are Korath, about 200 ships worth. We are going in first to secure the station before the fleet arrives. Any questions?" One soldier raised his hand, a young man with bright red hair and freckles covering his face. His name was Private William O'Brien, and he was the newest member of the team. "Sir," he asked, "how are we getting past 200 enemy warships?" Petrov grinned. The expression would have frightened small children. "We are going to use a stealth insertion pod," he explained. "Very fast, very quiet, very small. The enemy will not see us until we are already inside the station. Then we hold the line until our ships arrive." Another soldier, a woman with a shaved head and tattoos covering her arms, spoke up. Her name was Sergeant Maria Santos, and she was the team's explosives expert. "What if the fleet does not arrive in time?" she asked. "Then we make sure those Korath bastards remember us forever," Petrov answered. The soldiers laughed, but there was no fear in the sound. They had chosen this life knowing they might die at any moment. They had accepted that fate long ago. What mattered now was saving those innocent people on the station, back in space. The Third Fleet finished its preparations and jumped into hyperspace. The ships disappeared in flashes of blue light, leaving behind nothing but empty darkness. They would travel for several hours through the strange dimension that allowed faster-than-light movement, and then they would emerge ready for war. Admiral Okonkwo spent the journey reviewing everything she knew about the Koroth, that were a reptilian species that valued strength above all else. They had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings. They were cruel, ruthless, and extremely skilled at combat, but they had never fought humans before. Not really. There had been small skirmishes over the years, brief encounters that ended quickly. The Koroth thought they understood what humans were capable of. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Admiral pulled up images of the research station on her screen. It was tiny compared to the massive Koroth fleet surrounding it. The shields were already weakening from constant bombardment. According to her calculations, the station would fall within 12 hours if nothing changed. She planned to change everything in a small cargo bay aboard the UN's Vengeance. Colonel Petrov and his team loaded into their stealth insertion pod. It was barely larger than a school bus, designed to slip through enemy defenses without being detected. Inside, 24 of the most dangerous soldiers humanity had ever produced prepared their weapons and waited for the signal to launch. Petrov looked at each of them in turn. Some were young, some were old. Some had families waiting for them at home. Some had no one. But all of them shared the same determination in their eyes. They would save those civilians or die trying. He activated his communication device and spoke to the Admiral. Colonel Petrov reporting ready for launch, he said. Give us a good distraction when you arrive. Admiral Okonkwo's voice came back through the speaker, calm and confident. Oh, Colonel, she replied. I plan to give them much more than a distraction. I plan to give them a war they will never forget. The pod launched from the cargo bay and shot forward into hyperspace, following a slightly different path than the main fleet. It would arrive at the station 30 minutes before the warships, giving Petrov and his team time to infiltrate and secure the civilians. As the pod hurtled through the swirling colors of hyperspace, Private O'Brien found himself sitting next to Sergeant Santos. She was checking her grenades for the third time, counting each one carefully. Are you scared? He asked her quietly. She looked at him with dark eyes that had seen too much death. Always, she admitted. Only fools are not scared before battle. But I am more scared of what happens to those people if we fail. That fear is bigger than my fear of dying. O'Brien nodded slowly, understanding her words. He had joined the Marines because he wanted to make a difference, wanted to protect people who could not protect themselves. Now he was about to get his chance. The pod continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying its deadly cargo toward a battle that would change the galaxy forever. The stealth pod emerged from hyperspace behind a large asteroid, hidden from the Koroth sensors. Colonel Petrov watched through a small viewport as the enemy fleet came into view. It was an impressive sight. Hundreds of warships arranged in perfect formation around the tiny research station. The station's shields were flickering badly now. Blue energy crackled and sparked where enemy weapons struck the protective barrier. According to Petrov's calculations, the shields would fail completely within 8 hours. The main fleet would arrive in 10 hours. That left a dangerous gap that his team would have to fill. Everyone prepare for insertion. He commanded through his helmet radio. Remember the mission. Protect the civilians at all costs. Do not let the enemy reach the weapon storage area. If they get that ancient device, millions will die. The pod's engines fired briefly, sending it on a carefully calculated trajectory toward the station. It was designed to look like space debris, moving slowly and without any heat signature that might attract attention. The Koroth sensors scanned right past it, seeing nothing worth investigating as they approached the station. Petrov could see damage already visible on the outer hull. Several sections had been hit by enemy fire, venting atmosphere into space. Emergency seals had closed off those areas, but anyone trapped inside was already dead. He felt anger building in his chest, cold and controlled like a carefully maintained flame. The pod attached to an airlock on the station's lower section with a soft clang. Sergeant Santos moved first, cutting through the airlock door with a plasma torch while the others covered her with their weapons. In 30 seconds they were inside. The station's interior was chaos. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the corridors. Civilians ran past in terror, some carrying children, others dragging wounded friends. The smell of smoke and fear filled the air. Petrov grabbed a passing Villani scientist by the arm, stopping her gently but firmly. Where is your command center? He demanded. Where is Captain Zip? The scientist stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. She had never seen a human before. Everything about Petrov seemed wrong to her, from his small eyes to his heavy build to the massive gun in his hands. But she recognized a soldier when she saw one, and right now she desperately needed soldiers. Upper levels, she stammered, pointing toward a nearby elevator. Follow the main corridor, turn right at the medical bay. Petrov nodded and released her. Thank you. Now get somewhere safe and stay hidden. Help is coming. He signaled his team to move, and they advanced through the station in perfect formation. Private O'Brien found himself at the rear of the group, watching their backs as they climbed toward the command center. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear anything else. They encountered their first Korath soldiers near the engineering section. A group of 6 enemy warriors had already boarded through a damaged hull section and were moving toward the power core. They were bigger than humans, covered in dark scales, and carrying weapons that glowed with deadly energy. The firefight lasted approximately 4 seconds. Petrov and his team moved with a speed and precision that the Korath could not match. Before the enemy soldiers could even aim their weapons, they were cut down by a hail of human gunfire. The humans stepped over the bodies without pausing. Continuing their advance, Sergeant Santos stopped briefly to examine one of the fallen Korath. She had never killed this species before and wanted to understand their anatomy. She noted the thick skull plates, the armored scales on their chest, and the location of major blood vessels. This information might save lives later. "More enemies ahead," she reported, reading the motion sensor on her wrist. 20 at least, maybe more. They are gathered near a large chamber on the next level. Petrov checked his tactical display. That chamber contained the ancient weapon that Drosa had discovered. The Korath were already trying to secure it. He could not let them succeed. He split his team into 3 groups. Santos would take one group through the maintenance tunnels to attack from below. O'Brien and 4 others would circle around to cut off any retreat. Petrov himself would lead the main assault directly through the front door. They moved into position with silent efficiency, communicating through hand signals and brief radio bursts. When everyone was ready, Petrov gave the order to attack. The assault was brutal and bloody. The Korath fought with desperate fury, knowing that failure meant disgrace and execution, but they were facing Deathworlders, beings who had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. The humans had survived earthquakes, volcanoes, predators, diseases, and each other. Compared to Earth, this battle was almost peaceful. Private O'Brien killed his first enemy soldier with a shot to the head at close range. The Korath had tried to grab him with its claws, moving faster than he expected. But O'Brien was faster still. His body reacted before his mind could process what was happening, trained reflexes taking over when conscious thought was too slow. He killed his second enemy with a knife. When his gun ran empty, the blade punched through the soft tissue under the Korath's jaw, reaching the brain in a single thrust. O'Brien felt the creature's hot blood splash across his face and did not even flinch when the shooting stopped. 23 Korath soldiers lay dead on the floor. 2 humans were wounded, but neither seriously. Petrov examined the ancient weapon in the center of the room. It looked like a metallic sphere covered with symbols similar to those on the Korath ships. He could feel power radiating from it, a strange vibration that made his teeth hurt. "Secure this room," he ordered. "Nothing gets in or out until the fleet arrives." Santos worked quickly, setting up explosive charges at every entrance. If the Korath wanted this weapon, they would have to pay for every meter with blood. The room became a fortress within minutes, bristling with guns and traps. Meanwhile, the command center, Captain Zilera had watched the battle through security cameras. She could not believe what she was seeing. The humans fought like demons, moving through her station's corridors with terrifying efficiency. Where the Korath used brute force, the humans used precision. Where the enemy hesitated, the humans attacked. She opened a communication channel to Pet. "This is Captain Zilera," she said, her voice shaking. "I do not know who you are, but thank you. Thank you for coming." Petrov's face appeared on her screen, covered with blood and sweat. "Colonel Viktor Petrov, Terran Marine Corps. My admiral sends her regards and asks you to hold on a little longer. Our fleet will arrive in approximately 9 hours. Can your shields last that long?" Zilera checked her engineering read. "We have maybe 7 hours before total shield failure," she admitted. "After that, they can board at will." "Then we have 7 hours to figure something out," Petrov said. "Do you have any weapons on this station? Anything we can use?" Zilera thought for a moment. "We have mining equipment in the storage bays. Plasma cutters, explosive charges for asteroid work, even some old drilling machines. Nothing designed for combat, but they might help." "Perfect," Petrov replied. "Send me the location. We are going to turn this station into a death trap." Outside the station, Grand Admiral Voroth watched his screens with growing frustration. His boarding parties were not responding to communication attempts. Something had gone wrong. He ordered more troops sent in. Hundreds of soldiers to overwhelm whatever resistance they faced. He had no idea that the resistance was human. He had never faced Deathworlders in combat before. By the time he understood what he was dealing with, it would be far too late. The hours that followed were the longest of Captain Zilera's life. She watched from the command center as waves of Korath soldiers poured into her station through breached hull sections. Each wave was larger than the one before. Each wave pushed deeper into the station's interior. And each wave was eventually stopped by the humans defending the critical areas. Colonel Petrov had transformed the research station into a maze of death. Mining explosives were hidden in ceiling panels, set to detonate when enemy sensors detected movement. Plasma cutters had been modified into automated turrets, sweeping corridors with blasts of superheated energy. Even the station's cleaning robots had been reprogrammed to carry explosive charges, rolling innocently toward enemy positions before detonating with devastating force. Private O'Brien crouched behind a makeshift barricade made of furniture and debris. His rifle was hot from constant use, the barrel glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting. He had lost count of how many enemies he had killed in the past 3 hours. The number no longer seemed important. Beside him, Sergeant Santos was patching a wound on his arm where a Korath blade had gotten through. The cut was deep, but she wrapped it tightly with medical tape and gave him a quick injection for the pain. "You are doing good, kid," she told him. "Stay focused. Stay alive." O'Brien nodded, checking his ammunition. He had 2 magazines left, maybe 60 rounds total. After that, he would have to use his knife, or his bare hands. He found that the thought did not frighten him as much as it should have in another part of the station. Colonel Petrov was personally defending the chamber containing the ancient weapon. The Korath had realized that this was his position and had concentrated their attacks here. He had been fighting continuously for 5 hours, pausing only to reload and drink water. His cybernetic arm had been damaged in an explosion 2 hours ago. The metal fingers sparked and twitched unpredictably, but he could still pull a trigger, still swing a blade, still kill enemies who came too close. That was all that mattered. A massive Korath warrior burst through the doorway, roaring with rage. It was twice the size of a normal soldier, covered in heavy armor that deflected most weapons fire. Petrov met its charge head-on, ducking under a sweeping claw attack and driving his combat knife into the joint between its helmet and chest plate. The creature screamed and fell, crushing a smaller enemy that had been following behind it. Petrov retrieved his knife and returned to his position, barely breathing hard despite the intense exertion. On the command center screens, Zillera could see the overall tactical situation. The humans were holding their positions, but just barely. Each defensive line had been pushed back slightly over the hours. Each team had fewer soldiers than before. Some were wounded, some were dead, and reinforcements were not coming. She opened a channel to Petrov. "Colonel," she said, her voice hollow with exhaustion, "our shields are about to fail completely. When that happens, the enemy can bombard us directly. They could destroy the entire station rather than continue this ground assault." Petrov considered this information. While reloading his weapon, "You are right," he admitted. "We need to give them a reason to keep boarding rather than shooting, something they want intact." Zillera understood immediately. "Me," she said. "I am the station commander. They will want to capture me alive for interrogation. If I broadcast my location, they will focus their attacks there." "No," Petrov replied firmly. "I am not using civilians as bait. That is not how we operate." But Zillera was already standing, walking toward the door of the command center. "I am not a civilian anymore, Colonel. I became a soldier the moment I sent that distress call. Let me do something useful with the time I have left." Before Petrov could argue further, she was gone, disappearing into the station's corridors with a small group of volunteers from her crew. They were scientists and technicians who had never fired weapons before today, but they had learned quickly. Desperation was an excellent teacher. Zillera positioned herself in the central plaza of the station, a large open area where multiple corridors converged. It was the worst possible place for a defensive position, completely exposed with no cover, but it was also the most visible location on the station, guaranteed to attract attention. She activated the station's internal speakers and broadcast her voice to every corner of the facility. "This is Captain Zillera," she announced. "I am in the central plaza. I know you want me alive, Korath. Come and get me." The response was immediate. Enemy soldiers began converging on her position from multiple directions, but they came carefully, not wanting to accidentally kill their valuable prisoner. This slowed them down, giving the humans time to reposition and strengthen their lines elsewhere. Zillera and her volunteers fought with a courage that surprised even themselves. They were not trained soldiers, did not have the reflexes or skills of the human marines, but they had something else. They had everything to lose, and nothing left to fear. The battle in the plaza lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, Zillera was the only one of her group still alive. She had been shot twice, in the shoulder and the leg, and was bleeding heavily. Enemy soldiers surrounded her, pointing weapons at her face while their commander approached. The Korath officer looked at her with contempt. "You fought well for a weakling species," he admitted, "but it is over now. Tell us where the weapon is hidden, and your death will be quick." Zillera laughed, coughing blood. She pointed upward toward the stars visible through a damaged section of ceiling. "My death does not matter," she said. "Your death is coming on those ships." The Korath officer followed her gesture and saw nothing but empty space. "There are no ships," he said. "Your reinforcements are not coming. You are alone." But even as he spoke, his communication device crackled with static. Urgent messages from other parts of the station reported that something was happening. The human defenders were fighting with renewed energy, pushing back against positions they had been losing for hours. Something had changed out far away, but growing closer every second. 42 points of light were emerging from hyperspace. The third human fleet had arrived early. Admiral Okonkwo had pushed her ships harder than anyone thought possible, burning out engines and straining reactors to the breaking point. She had shaved 2 hours off the expected arrival time through sheer force of will. On the bridge of the Un's Vengeance, she stood before the main view screen and watched the Korath fleet scramble to react. They were out of position, their formation broken by the prolonged ground assault. Many of their smaller ships were still docked with the station, unable to join the coming battle. "All ships," she commanded, her voice cold as space itself, "weapons free, to destroy them all." The first salvo from the human fleet lit up the darkness like a new star being born. Missiles and plasma beams screamed across the void, tearing through Korath ships before they could raise shields or return fire. The destroyer UN's Fury was first into the gap, weaving between enemy vessels while firing in every direction. Captain Martinez laughed as he watched a Korath cruiser explode from his ship's guns. "This is what we trained for," he shouted to his crew. "This is why we exist. Make them remember this day forever." The battle had begun. Grand Admiral Varoth watched his fleet die around him and could not understand what was happening. His ships outnumbered the humans almost 5 to 1. His crews were experienced veterans of dozens of campaigns. His technology was supposedly equal to anything the Deathworlders possessed. None of that seemed to matter. The human warships moved through his formation like predators among prey. They struck from unexpected angles, disappeared before return fire could find them, and reappeared somewhere else to strike again. Their coordination was perfect, each ship supporting the others in a complex dance of destruction that the Korath could not match. The dreadnought UNS Vengeance anchored the human line, its massive guns firing continuously. Each shot from its main weapons could destroy a smaller vessel outright or cripple a larger one with a single hit. Admiral Okonkwo directed the battle from her command chair, making decisions faster than her enemy could react. "Concentrate fire on their command ship," she ordered, highlighting Varath's flagship on the tactical display. "Cut off the head and the body dies." 30 human vessels adjusted their positions, bringing their weapons to bear on a single target. The Korath flagship was large and heavily armored, but it could not survive what was coming. Shields flickered and failed under the concentrated assault. Hull plates melted and vaporized. Internal explosions began ripping the ship apart from within. Varath watched his bridge crew die. Around him as fire and debris tore through the compartment. His tactical officer was crushed by a falling support beam. His communications officer was sucked out through a hull breach. His first officer simply disappeared in a flash of plasma fire. The Grand Admiral himself was thrown against a bulkhead, breaking several bones. He lay on the deck, staring at the ceiling as his ship collapsed around him. His last thought was of confusion. How had this happened? How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? The explosion that destroyed his flagship was visible from the research station. Colonel Petrov saw it through a window while dragging a wounded soldier to a medical station. He allowed himself a brief smile before returning to work. The battle was not over yet. On the station itself, the tide had turned completely. The Korath soldiers who had been boarding for hours now found themselves cut off from their ships. Many of those ships no longer existed, destroyed in the space battle raging outside. The invaders were trapped, surrounded, and facing enemies who showed no mercy. Private O'Brien led a counterattack that drove the remaining Korath from the engineering section. He was operating on adrenaline and determination, ignoring the pain from his wounds, focusing only on the mission. Beside him, Sergeant Santos threw grenades with devastating accuracy, each explosion sending enemy soldiers flying. The central plaza where Zillera had made her stand was retaken by a team of Marines who found the captain barely conscious. Surrounded by the bodies of enemies she had killed with nothing but a broken metal pipe, they carried her to safety while medics worked desperately to save her life in the chamber containing the ancient weapon. Colonel Petrov finally received word that reinforcements had arrived. Fresh Marines from the fleet were boarding the station through newly created access points. The enemy was retreating, falling back toward airlocks and docking bays that no longer connected to functioning ships. The battle continued for another 3 hours as human forces systematically eliminated every Korath soldier remaining on the station. Some enemies tried to surrender, but the Marines had seen what the Korath did to prisoners and were not feeling merciful. By the time the station was declared secure, not a single invader remained alive. Outside, Admiral Okonkwo directed the final stages of the space battle. The remaining Korath ships were scattered and leaderless, easy targets for her hunting packs. She could have let them flee, could have shown mercy to a defeated enemy, but she remembered the distress call. She remembered the fear in Captain Zylara's voice. She remembered that children had been on this station terrified for their lives. "Hunt them down," she ordered. "None escape. None return home to tell others what happened here. Let this be a lesson the galaxy never forgets." The pursuit lasted for 2 days. Human ships chased fleeing Korath vessels across 3 star systems, destroying them one by one. Captain Martinez and the UNS Fury accounted for 11 kills personally, more than any other vessel in the fleet. When the last enemy ship exploded, Martinez opened a bottle of whiskey that he had been saving for a special occasion. Meanwhile, the research station began the long process of recovery. Medical teams from the fleet treated the wounded, engineers repaired critical systems, counselors helped traumatized civilians begin dealing with what they had experienced. The death toll was horrific, over 60 scientists and crew members killed. But it could have been much worse. Captain Zilara survived her injuries after 3 surgeries and many blood transfusions. She woke up in the medical bay of the UN's Vengeance, confused and disoriented. Admiral Okonkwo was sitting beside her bed, waiting patiently. "You saved my people," Zilara whispered, her throat dry and painful. Okonkwo handed her a cup of water. "You called for help," she replied. "We answered. That is what we do." Zilara drank slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. "The ancient weapon?" she asked. "What happened to it?" "We secured it," Okonkwo assured her. "A science team from Earth is coming to study it properly. Whatever it is, whatever it can do, it will never fall into Koroth's hands. You have my word on that." The Valani captain nodded, relieved. She had one more question. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you come so far, risk so many lives, for strangers you had never met?" Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because once, a very long time ago, nobody came to help us. We were alone, fighting for survival on a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned that the universe is cruel and dangerous and does not care about justice or fairness. So we decided to care. We decided that when someone calls for help, we answer. Always." Zilara felt tears forming in her large eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." 3 months later, the Galactic Council held an emergency session to discuss the events at the Valdrix Research Station. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to hear testimony and review evidence. The Koroth Empire was officially condemned, its territory marked for sanctions and embargo. But the real topic of discussion was the humans. Stories of the battle had spread across known space, growing larger with each retelling. The Deathworlders had traveled across the galaxy to save strangers. They had faced impossible odds and won. They had shown both terrifying violence and remarkable compassion. The Valani ambassador stood before the council and spoke with quiet emotion. "We have long known that humans are dangerous," he said. "We have feared their strength, their relentless determination, their ability to survive where others perish. Today I tell you that we were right to fear these things, but we were wrong about what they mean." He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "The humans are not monsters," he continued. "They are protectors. They have taken the darkness that exists in their nature and turned it into a shield for those who cannot protect themselves. They are exactly what this galaxy needs, and I am proud to call them our allies." The council chamber erupted in applause. Human representatives sat quietly, accepting the praise without arrogance. They knew better than anyone what they were capable of. They had simply chosen to use that capability for good. Back on the research station, now fully repaired and operating again, a small memorial had been built in the central plaza. It listed the names of everyone who had died during the attack. Valani names, human names, all together on the same wall. Colonel Petrov visited the memorial before returning to Earth. He stood alone in the quiet space, reading each name carefully. Behind him, Private O'Brien waited respectfully. "They will not be forgotten," O'Brien said quietly. Petrov nodded slowly. "None of them will be forgotten. Not the ones who died here, and not the ones who tried to destroy this place. The galaxy will remember what happened. And the next time someone thinks about attacking innocent people, they will remember what happens when the Deathworlders answered the call." He turned and walked away, leaving the memorial behind. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, other signals were traveling, other calls for help from other desperate beings. And somewhere, humans were listening. They would always be listening, and they would always answer.